The sackcloth shifted in the heat, whispering against itself like a dying leaf. It hung over the girl's face, tied tight at the neck, and though she stood still, bound at the wrists, her breath stirred the fabric in short, panicked bursts. Dust curled at her bare ankles. Behind her, a line of tethered horses stamped and tossed their heads, but the crowd in front of her, 30, maybe 40 townsfolk, sunburnt and sharp-eyed, stood dead quiet. The only sound was the creak of the platform boards and the dry-throated drone of Mayor Crutchfield, clearing his throat with theatrical slowness. "Now what we got here," the mayor drawled, pacing before the sack-shrouded girl, "ain't no ordinary livestock. No, sir. This here's a mail-order bride, freshly delivered to the station this morning. Unclaimed, unchaperoned, and, far as I can tell, ungrateful." A few chuckles cracked the silence, brittle as autumn twigs. Boaz McAllister didn't laugh. He stood at the back of the gathering, shoulders casting a long shadow, his thumbs hooked loosely in his belt. The sun pressed against the crown of his hat, and sweat pooled at the edge of his collar, but he didn't move. He watched the girl on the block with the stillness of a man who'd learned to endure spectacle in silence. He knew the weight of town eyes, knew what it was to be looked at and not seen. The mayor reached up and yanked the sack free. Delilah Rose Hemmings blinked against the sudden light. Her lips were split, her hair clung to her temples, and her dress was torn at the shoulder, cheap muslin soaked with travel and tears. Her cheeks were flushed, whether from heat or shame no one could say, but it was her belly that stole the breath from the crowd. Swollen, round, a ripening defiance that made mothers clutch their children closer. "She's pregnant," someone hissed. Delilah trembled. Boaz's jaw tightened. Delilah couldn't see him yet, not through the blur of light and humiliation, but she sensed something, a pause in the air, a stillness more solid than the rest. She wanted to run, scream, vanish into dirt, but her knees locked. The baby kicked, sharp and sudden, and her hands clenched in the rope binding her wrists. The mayor turned to the crowd. "As you can see, she's in a most urgent condition. Her papers say she was meant for a Mr. Elwood Reich, but the good man declined upon discovery of her state. So, any able-bodied gentleman who'd like a woman and her upcoming young un, now's your time." No one stepped forward. The sun burned hotter. Dust stuck to sweat. Delilah opened her mouth to plead, but closed it again, swallowing the salt. "Can she even cook?" Miss Etta muttered, loud enough to carry. "Likely can't keep her legs closed either," added a grizzled old-timer, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Delilah flinched as if struck. She hadn't meant to be here, hadn't meant to end up on a platform like livestock. Lavinia had promised her a future, promised that Elwood would be kind, and that this baby could be hidden in a new name. But when they reached Cold Briar, Lavinia slipped away like a shadow. She'd boarded the westbound train that morning, leaving Delilah behind with forged documents and a heavy womb. Delilah drew a breath. "My baby is coming," she said, voice shaking. "Please remove the sack." And by me, the crowd hushed again, not from awe, but from discomfort. Even Crutchfield seemed to waver. She scanned the crowd, eyes flicked away, embarrassed. Men who'd once written letters for wives now looked at their boots. The baby shifted again inside her, restless. Delilah gritted her teeth. Boaz took one step forward. No one noticed at first, not until the creaking of the board under his boot caught someone's ear. A few turned. Whispers rolled through the crowd. "That's McAllister. He was sweet on Lavinia, wasn't he?" She called him a hog in a waistcoat, walked off his porch laughing. Delilah caught the name. Her breath caught too. Boaz moved slow, like something carved from the mesa itself. He didn't look at the crowd. His eyes were only for her. When they met hers, Delilah felt, not pity, but steadiness. A strange, grounded calm that made her knees shake harder. Crutchfield squinted. "You here to bid, Boaz?" The rancher didn't answer at first. His fingers flexed against his belt. Then he nodded once. A deep, deliberate nod. "I'll take her." That weren't a bid. Boaz's gaze didn't flicker. "I'll take her," he repeated, and this time there was something in it, like stone meeting steel. Crutchfield sputtered, looked around. Any others? Surely a man'd want a girl this fresh. Silence. The crowd had drawn back slightly, not in fear, but in some unspoken awe. Boaz McAllister had been laughed at, mocked for his size, whispered about for years. But when he spoke now, it felt like the land itself had made a choice. Crutchfield muttered, $1 then. Sold. He cut the rope from Delilah's wrists with more grumble than ceremony. She nearly fell, but Boaz stepped forward and caught her under the arms. She looked up at him. He didn't smile, but he steadied her like he'd been built to. She smelled horses on him, pine soap, and something older like quiet grief. You hurt? He asked, voice low. She shook her head, though her ankles ached and her dignity had splintered to pieces. He helped her down from the block, slow and careful. The wind picked up. Behind them, the town began to scatter like startled birds, no longer entertained, no longer needed. Only Miss Etta lingered, her eyes softer now, as if she'd just remembered her own sins. Boaz led Delilah toward a wagon. The boards creaked, the reins jangled. He helped her climb in, then moved to the front seat without a word. Delilah sat, hands resting on her belly. You didn't ask my name, she said quietly. I know it, Boaz replied. She watched his profile, the way his brow furrowed like he was bracing against something heavier than judgment. Maybe loneliness. Maybe the memory of Lavinia's laughter. The wagon pulled out of town. Behind them, the platform stood empty, the sack crumpled and forgotten in the dust. But as they passed the last buildings of Cold Briar, Delilah turned back for a moment, her eyes narrowing against the sun, and she realized something terrifying and tender all at once. She had not been rescued. She had been seen. The first night at the ranch passed in the hush between two people too broken to speak. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed he'd given her, clean sheets, fresh from the line, with a faint scent of sagebrush. The room was spare, but not cold. There was a lamp, a quilt folded at the foot, and a cup of cool water on the windowsill that hadn't been there earlier. Boaz never came inside. She heard his boots on the porch after supper, the dull scrape of him setting down her tray, then the creak of boards as he walked back into the dark. He said nothing. By morning, the wind had shifted. The clouds above the prairie were long and low, like tired cattle, and the air smelled of coming rain. She found her boots placed beside the door, their dried mud cleaned off with surprising care. Boaz was splitting wood, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, wide back bowed to the task. His axe thudded into the stump with a rhythm more like prayer than labor. She watched through the cracked window pane, one hand on her belly, the other pressed against her lips as if afraid of what might spill from them. She hadn't thanked him, not for the bid, not for the room, not for not asking her anything at all. She stepped onto the porch with a soft grunt, the baby kicking low, and eased herself into the chair beside the door. It rocked slightly. Boaz had fixed it overnight. The splintered armrest was sanded smooth, the missing dowel replaced. You fixed this, she said. He nodded without looking up. She paused, biting her lower lip. What? He set down the axe, wiped his brow. Things ought to hold together. She looked at him, the way his eyes stayed on the grain of the wood, not her face. Even broken things? Boaz leaned against the fence post. Especially them. She said nothing after that. Didn't need to. For 3 days, they lived in that quiet rhythm. She took to sweeping the porch. He left bowls of stew near the door. The barn cat began curling up near her boots like it belonged there, too. On the 4th evening, thunder cracked like a rifle shot over the hills. She pressed her hands to her belly. The child stirred again, restless. That night, the storm came in hard. Boaz lit the lamps, closed the shutters. She stood by the hearth, one hand bracing her back. You all right? He asked. She hesitated, then gave him the truth. I'm scared. Boaz nodded, slow and solemn. You're allowed to be. She stared into the fire. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This baby wasn't meant to come here. Lavinia, she was supposed to marry. I was the mistake. I was sent instead. Boaz's hands curled around the back of the chair. She didn't want to be shamed. Delilah laughed without joy. She wanted to stay polished. I was already tarnished. He didn't argue, didn't offer soft lies. Just sat down near the fire, his boots silent on the plank floor. I ever tell you Lavinia once stepped up to my porch? He said. Delilah looked at him, eyes wide. She was dressed in yellow, smelled like peaches and pride. I asked her to stay for supper. She looked at me like I'd handed her a shovel instead of a pie. What did she say? She laughed, he said, and walked away. Delilah's throat caught. Boaz didn't flinch. But you looked at me square. On that platform. Not with pity. Not with scorn. You saw me. Delilah looked down. Because you saw me first. The wind howled around the cabin, and the fire cracked, throwing shadows against the wall. Suddenly, Delilah's knees buckled. She caught the table edge with a cry. Boaz was at her side in 2 strides. Is it time? I don't know, she panted. It hurts. It hurts bad. He scooped her into his arms. She was so light he felt like a fool for not holding her sooner. He carried her to the room, laid her down. Her fingers dug into his shirt. I can't do it alone, she gasped. You won't. He boiled water, found clean towels, remembered the stories his mother used to tell about birthing calves and praying through pain. He sat by her through the long night, wiping her brow, letting her squeeze the life out of his hand. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something far louder rose. Her voice, her body, her breaking open for the child that had been scorned even before its first breath. Then, just before dawn, the cry came. High and fragile. Beautiful. Boaz blinked. His hands trembled as he wrapped the baby in cloth. Delilah, slick with sweat and trembling, reached for the bundle. She's a girl, he whispered. Delilah smiled through tears. Her name is Hope. Boaz sat down on the floor beside the bed, legs suddenly too weak to hold him. Hope made a soft sound, like a sigh of wind through grass. You saved me, Delilah said, barely louder than the rain on the roof. He shook his head. No, I just didn't look away. They sat like that until morning painted the sky with rose and gold. The storm had passed. The world outside dripped with newness. Delilah cradled Hope and looked at Boaz, not as a stranger, not as the man who'd bought her, but as something steadier. A pillar, a place. Boaz stood slowly, moved to the window, and looked out over the wet fields. The town talk, he said. They always do. Delilah leaned back, closing her eyes. Let them. They don't know what was born here tonight. He didn't answer, but something shifted in his shoulders, like a man letting go of a weight he'd carried too long. Behind them, Hope stirred, fist curled against her cheek. Delilah traced a finger along her brow and whispered, You were never the mistake. Then, just as the wind died down and the morning took its first breath, a knock came. 3 slow raps. Firm. Familiar. Delilah's eyes opened. Boaz froze mid-step. A voice called through the door. Boaz McAllister? It's Lavinia Hemmings. I've come to collect my sister.